Bella! Where the hell have you been, Loka?
Yes, it's been 10 years since Dragon Age Inquisition came out, and I think it's worth mentioning, because Inquisition had a great art style that has aged pretty well. When I was replaying it recently, I very quickly forgot how old it was, and just got sucked into the experience. To be fair though, leaps in graphical capabilities in the past decade have comparably slowed down from how they used to be in the early years of gaming. People these days like to discuss a theoretical point on the horizon when graphical improvements will become so subtle that we don't give them as much weight anymore, like the differences between the PS5 and the PS5 Pro. Indeed, the greatest choice many games can make these days, the choice that many people will remember them for, is what direction to take their art style in. Hi, my name is Rowan, also known as HauntedGod, and today I want to talk to you about the latest installment of one of my all-time favorite video game series, a little project called Dragon Age the Veilguard. First, some context of who the hell I am and why I care. I'm an amateur game dev with a BFA in fashion design, meaning I did the whole art school shebang. Other than fashion, my course of study included a lot of classes on the analysis, history, and criticism of art in general, including classes about newer art forms. When I picked my major, I was quite on the fence about whether I should pick games or fashion. I ended up in fashion, but never actually stopped learning about how game dev works. These days I do a mixture of both, especially in the department of character concept art. So that's where I'm at. I hope you'll listen along and we can all learn some things together today. Dragon Age the Veilguard was announced to be headed for actual release merely months ago, and we're already almost there. I can hardly believe that I'll be back into exploring Thedas in a matter of, days at this point? My hype has been keeping me hyper-focused, and so I've inhaled as much of the lead-up content as I could get my hands on. In the course of doing that, it's been no secret that one of the largest criticisms of the Veilguard has been all about its art style, which is certainly a change from the rest of the series. I can only assume that fans have a soft spot for Inquisition's mix of lovingly textured characters and heaps of gorgeous 2D art, or Dragon Age 2's more underrated flair. Either that or they're Origins-only enjoyers and are desperately waiting for the mod that will make everything brown. But the most obvious thing to say to this is that there has been no one prevailing style for Dragon Age. Sure, certain elements get carried between games, but each one has had its own unique thumbprint. Still, saying this doesn't matter to people who simply don't like Veilguard's style. My quest is to analyze, in the best faith I can, why this is on a deeper level, from the perspective of someone who quite likes Veilguard's art, but just wants to substantiate these talking points to understand them better. I don't think most people who have an issue with Veilguard's art know how to articulate it in so many words as I do, being someone who does this exact thing on a regular basis. Criticism 1. It looks like a Saturday morning cartoon. What? Seriously, what? You're goofing with me, right? Are we talking about Hanna-Barbera or something else? Not even all Saturday morning cartoons look like each other. Well, I'm going to skip this one because I think it'll be addressed just fine in the next point. Criticism 2. It looks like Fortnite, / Overwatch, / a hero shooter, / a mobile game. This is the big one. And so let's dive right in. This is such a common thing to say, it's almost like a stock catchphrase at this point. Sometimes I see people tossing Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy into this, but I think that's actually not in reference to the game's art style, so much as it's in reference to the quippy, irony-poisoned tone of the current generation of Marvel properties, so that's a scripting thing. Guardians of the Galaxy actually looks quite realistic, comparatively anyway. No, this criticism is centered mostly on the character models. I barely have to point that part out. The previous criticism talking about cartoons was about this too, just with a more flippant tone. which is why I didn't really bother showing the environments from the Veilguard as a comparison point, because that would be too easy of a swing against that. And it is sort of too easy of a swing against this point too. The Veilguard's environmental art is detailed and naturalistic. It seems to be a straight evolution from Inquisition's environmental art, which was also quite lovely. The Emerald Graves is one of my favorite places to explore in all of gaming because of how it beautifully captures wandering around in a sun-dappled old-growth forest. It almost makes me want to go out and touch grass. Before I go any further here, I want to state firmly that whether or not you like the Veilguard's character design is going to be completely subjective. There is no reason on hell or earth why you should change your opinion just because I don't agree with you. Remember that the goal here is analysis and not necessarily to persuade you. Well, aside from my pet theory that those who compare the Veilguard to Fortnite are just having a visceral reaction to this shade of purple used in the marketing, it specifically has to do with how the characters are clearly more stylized than in previous entries of the series. Especially in comparison to their environments, there's just a touch of exaggeration of forms that I see some people perceiving as a little uncanny, especially when placed side by side. There is a history of some form of stylization in Dragon Age games. I think Dragon Age 2 is a stellar example of this. The non-human characters, elves, dwarves, and Kunari, are all very clearly delineated as such by their features. Varric in particular has just the most striking face, with his broad jaw, low brow, and chiseled nose. I think looking at his progression through the series from 2 to the Veilguard is a great baseline. I think the thing that stands out to me about his Veilguard self, aside from his gray hair, is how smooth he looks. I will definitely talk more about that smoothness a little later on, but not right now. My point is simply that this series has a precedent for not being the most realistic, so this evolution is not out of nowhere. And stylization has a use, too. As a game ages, any attempts at realism tend to age with it. It has been said that games with stylization tend to age better as a result. Inquisition, even with its more realistic approach to textures, still uses some stylization in character faces, and a hell of a lot in other places, like the tarot art. It was said in interviews with the devs that this tarot art in the series was really the inspiration to introduce further stylization into the Veilguard to make the characters resemble it more closely. Now, it's worth mentioning that this negative impression of the character stylization was cemented first by the companion reveal trailer, which people hated. Apparently even the devs don't like it, as it was put together by people outside the studio, though I don't have direct confirmation of this. I've just heard people say it.
Something interesting happened when I was at the event, and maybe I shouldn't say this, but I think it's interesting, so I'm going to say it anyways. And that is that I spoke to a number of people that, I'll keep it vague, are involved in Dragon Age the Veilguard to one degree or another, whether they're involved with the marketing or the development, what have you. And one thing I heard from pretty much everybody that I spoke to was that they didn't like that trailer either. They didn't want that trailer to go up and be the first look at Dragon Age the Veilguard. It seems as though internally the people actually making the game felt as though that was not representative of what the game was. It was potentially, my inference was that it was somebody higher up within EA or EA's marketing team that made that choice to frame the trailer in that way and try to sell the game in that style. And the people working on the game weren't happy about it, but their hands were kind of tied. They didn't get to make that choice. And since then, they've been trying to dig themselves out of that hole. But for me, it was reassuring to hear that the team that made the game was not thrilled with that trailer either. They felt that it wasn't indicative of what's actually here.
I think the trailer has a tonal mismatch that was confusing when there wasn't anything else to go off of for what this game would be like. Since then, we've seen more of the game, and it's clear that this trailer doesn't represent a true vertical slice. I can guess that the intent of it from how it was edited was to build hype, especially with the music, but the problem with that is I don't think fans wanted hype at the time. I think they wanted to be reassured that despite the developmental issues with the Veilguard, that what they were looking for in Dragon Age had survived intact. I remember personally, my reaction was just relief that Dragon Age 4 was happening at all, because I had long since lost hope that we would be getting anything new. Little did I know. Anyway, let's take a look at the other games that Veilguard has been compared to and what their characters actually look like. We can establish a sort of visual lexicon for this broad genre of game and what binds together the art styles of Fortnite, Overwatch, and less often name-drop titles in this conversation, like Apex Legends and Valorant. Character outfits have a consistency within their individual settings, but follow a similar overall trend. Fortnite has a more contemporary and casual take, while the others seem to lean hard into somewhere between sci-fi, military, or tactical, and techwear. Valorant is more cel-shaded in its promo art, and Apex Legends has the distinction of having the most detailed textures of the lot. But what they all have in common is this sort of face, and overall exaggerated proportions. Big eyes and pointed chins on female characters, cut from clay noses and hair. There's a lingering aftertaste of Disney that I have definitely heard people call out. Some of these make me think about Elsa. I'm not really big on how Frozen has spread around either, but it has not necessarily gotten into every hero shooter. I think Apex Legends looks very respectable. I've never played it before, but the art sort of makes me want to. And that's great, because the goal for any game of this genre is to have characters that look varied and express their own unique personalities, but look cohesive as a whole. And because if I don't mention it here, I know people are going to bring it up in the comments, Concord's character design suffers from something else entirely. People have pointed out that these characters are not very aspirational looking, which, I don't know. These faces aren't the same style as Overwatch, but the clothing is sort of related. They tried to make these very grounded looking characters, wear some outfits that I think look questionable proportionally. In the end, it sort of looks like the clothes are wearing them instead of the characters wearing their clothes. I could go on about it, but I don't think it's actually very relevant to Dragon Age's character art, so let's move on. Now that we've identified some defining traits of character design from Fortnite and company, let's do an experiment together. Go onto ArtStation and search for character art, and take a look at what people are uploading. ArtStation is used by people in quite a few industries, but mostly by video game industry professionals, posting work to their portfolios that makes them marketable for future job positions. Take a look at how many things are sort of adjacent to this hero shooter stylization. This style, to me, is really just the zeitgeist of many video games right now, for things that aren't even necessarily hero shooters. Why? Because I think the former mentioned games have been selling very well, and this is what companies are therefore asking for, though I think we are feeling the saturation point creeping up on us. I think that this, in particular, underlines the issue some people have been having with the Veilguard, because nobody wants to see Dragon Age completely kowtow to the market's whims. Nobody wants to see Dragon Age echoing this style that has become somewhat synonymous with games that seek to cash in the popularity of all of the above titles, except for Concord, which is not popular, obviously. The cheapness that people mention, I think, comes from this idea of something thrown together specifically to catch this trend, though I think it's odd in context of accusing Veilguard of the same, since it's not trying to slot into that genre of game at all. The development was in no hurry, considering it's been 10 years, and I think it's safe to say that all the devs had a long time to discuss how the characters' designs should be handled. What I also think is somewhat disingenuous is how people don't bring up games like Bioshock Infinite or Dishonored, which also do quite similar things, and have even done them before the hero shooter craze ramped up. If I wanted to, I could choose to be very, very annoying and insist to you that Elizabeth from Bioshock Infinite looks at home in a Pixar movie by cherry-picking comparable screenshots. But I won't, because it's dishonest. Because you can understand, having played Bioshock Infinite, that the overall art direction is comprised of elements apart from Elizabeth's face that allow it to be something greater and tell a story that many people are fond of. My overall opinion here is that I can definitely see how trends in video game character design have influenced the stylization of the Veilguard. Yes, there are some exaggerated shapes in the faces, particularly in Varric, Emmerich, Balara. Something is going on with the body proportions that people have pointed out. Everyone is also quite short, and the head to shoulder ratio is a bit different than what looks realistic. I also feel there's hints of something very now about props, like in this bow design. The prop design here is not something I particularly like, because it's straddling the edge of magic and a level of technology that does not yet feel substantiated in Dragon Age's lore. Its whole visual design feels alien to Thetis, shiny and new and overly fantastical without even a hint of Ferelden grime or Orlesian ornate tracery. But I'll admit, that could actually be purposeful. However, none of my personal complaints are that this is too cartoony or too much like Fortnite necessarily. It just looks like a video game to me, made in recent years, for better or for worse. But what makes me more favorable about it at the end of the day is the love and care that I can see in the little details. The Veilguard isn't merely stylized in the same way that Fortnite and Overwatch are. Faces have very accurate and realistic musculature under the skin. The skin itself does have a texture, even if it's far more subtle than Inquisition's. The clothing has detail work visible down to these tiny snowflakes and bits of embroidery on Nev. Light passing through Balara's ear makes her skin glow pink, like skin does in real life. And most impressively, there has been a lot of work done to create long hair that behaves pretty close to real hair. No clay hair here. My last comment on this matter is I don't really feel that stylization necessarily equates to childishness. Some people have said that it does, and I don't really think that holds water as an argument. We already know cartoons themselves aren't always for children, and maybe Fortnite's target demographic is kids with access to credit cards, but why does this necessarily mean Veilguard has identical intentions? To me, that just feels like guilt by association. Oh, can't make a guy with a funny nose because that means an immature audience and microtransactions, I guess. And on the flip side, what about realism says that it isn't for children? Do you think kids aren't playing Spider-Man? And not that it especially matters, but some people think that all video games are for kids, despite evidence to the contrary. Just to basically say that I think we, as people playing video games, should be past this sort of dismissal. There are always exceptions to the rules in your head. And again, you can feel absolutely free to dislike these character designs. You can feel they're ugly and not to your taste. But let's be very clear, these negative associations are subjective things too. Criticism 2.5. What about the UI? I ended up sliding this little addendum in here after watching a video by Loreworks where he redesigns the UI of Veilguard. I do appreciate the work he put in, and I don't think his corrections were necessarily bad. I think it succeeds at the design goals he lays out. But I bring it up because he shares a sentiment that other reviewers have had about the UI, specifically the excessive nature of it. I think this is just coming from a place of not getting why someone would need multiple kinds of visual feedback in order to play this game. And I don't want to be mean when I say this, but I would hope it's actually sort of obvious what kind of person this is for. It's for people with actual disabilities, who want to be able to engage in a full gaming experience. Which, like, I am praying that we agree that people who have limited motor skills, or people with vision impairment and other related disabilities. They do deserve to have something nice to play. That's a great goal, to make something that they can enjoy too. I know you don't need hand-holding through the UI prompts, Mr. Gamer Guy, but please, spare a thought for who this is for before you knock it as a mistake. As for the rest of us, it's been addressed. We will be able to turn most of the UI off.
Would it be possible to hide some of the combat UI, such as companion trackers and enemy HP bars, for even more immersion?
Yeah, good question. It's reasonably robust what you can do with your UI. So let me give you some examples. If normally when you hit an enemy, you'll see damage floaties come off of it. You want to turn those off? You can. If you want to play without, say, the minimap or the wayfinding markers, have a more organic experience, you can. I challenged myself to do it was really difficult, but to do a really difficult run where I turned off my own health bar, you can do that too. And then I know one of them that a lot of people have been asking about is we do have the incoming attack indicators that just help you react. But if you're the kind of player that wants to turn those off, cut down on the noise, yeah, you can do that too. So, I can't say that we support every single option you might have in mind, but it's reasonably robust.
I don't know how extensive this will actually be outside of what Corin says here in the Discord Q&A, but this situation with the UI is not actually that big of a deal if it's all customizable. The options are nice to have. And yes, some people will want it off by default, but if you're that kind of guy, I'm just gonna ask you nicely to be reasonable. Please. Nobody can read your mind and determine what you're gonna want the options to be toggled to right out of the box. Just go in there and fix it yourself. I always take a look anyway whenever I get a new game, just in case they don't have the subtitles on by default. Criticism 3. Where is the dark and gritty tone? I briefly discussed this before when I discussed the trailer, but I think that it deserves at least a little bit of a mention. This is more of a writing question than an art one, in my opinion. But I am someone who loves a good horror game and can't resist talking about this. The elements of horror that were thoughtfully utilized in Origins are some of the most memorable moments in the whole game. The tone feels pretty grim, since the blight mirrors a zombie apocalypse. It's a fun thing to throw into a fantasy setting. Likewise, there is an awful lot of tragedy in Dragon Age 2. Hawke is someone who simply can't get a break, dealing with death, madness, and terror at every turn. Fans have mentioned that there was a lot less of that feeling in Inquisition by comparison, and many similar doubts about the Veilguard have been laid out, even though we don't especially know much about the details of the full story past the first act at this point. Like whether or not there's something like a broodmother would not be laid out in promotion, because it would ruin the entire build-up that made that moment so effective in Origins. But I digress. It unsurprisingly circles back to the trailer and the character design stylization again, which I have mentally filed away as unimportant for this tone to work. Why? Because there's plenty of horror games these days with cuter art styles to contrast the subject matter. It's something that just requires careful execution, and what we have seen so far seems to be towing that line just fine, in my humble opinion. And, well, aside from the trailer and the character design stylization, I think the design of Minrathous has been cited as the culprit here a few times. Minrathous is the center of magic in all of Thedas, which is why it has this glowy look at night and the Imperial Palace is a floating panopticon. It definitely looks inspired by some cyberpunk design, but the architecture remains true to Tevinter. Regardless, some dislike the cyberpunk influences. I've definitely spoken with people who think that the number of glowy lights present has negatively affected the tone and the game's capacity to be dark and gritty. I've also heard the design of the Darkspawn brought up a surprising amount. What's been said is this guy's face is too goofy, which I think is subjective, first and foremost. I think it's alright. It doesn't really read as too goofy to me. And this is surprising because I didn't see this screenshot as anything but catching the monster at an odd moment. Regardless, if you watch footage of fighting Darkspawn, you don't actually see their faces close up very often at all, so it isn't as if you're going to have this grin staring at you the entire time. In this footage captured by Unifadewalker, I only caught a glimpse of it just once, and it looked like this, making it clear to me that this is pretty overblown. And the final nail in the coffin for this to me is you can take a look at what some concept art of the Darkspawn from the World of Thetis books look like. And you can see that they were clearly referencing it. If the Darkspawn looking funny at certain times, from certain angles, only when you're very up close, is somehow ruining this whole game for you, I think you might be splitting hairs. Overall, I don't have much more to say on this point, other than I think it'll matter most what the game offers as a whole, rather than how these visuals read on their own. We've seen some variety in locations that offer a more convincing backdrop for a horror-themed experience. We have even seen Minrathous during the daylight, which I think shows just how much it transforms by night. Veilguard has a broad capacity to bring the grit narratively thanks to the presence and influence of Gillenane and her penchant for making monsters, as revealed in the Horror of Hormak Into Winter Nights. Definitely read that if you haven't yet, for a taste of what may be to come. Critcism 4. Why is everyone so smooth? Why are the Qunari so smooth? Why is everyone in Inquisition so shiny? The mystery still unanswered till this day. Well, not to be too cheeky about it, I don't know, but I can try to guess. This is going to be a bit of a long and strange tangent. In the case of Inquisition, the leap in graphical quality across 3 years is probably the greatest in the whole series. We can immediately see that texture mapping and the way light works goes wild. Let me show you what I mean. As of recording in 2024, when setting up basic 3D materials in something like Blender, we have many levels of control. The base color, or albedo, is the main thing most of you will think of. But in addition to that, we can also set up the metallic quality, the roughness and smoothness, the ambient occlusion, alpha aka transparency, and some other layers that give additional three-dimensionality, normal maps, and displacement. Normal maps fake changes in the surface, while displacement actually alters the mesh. When you look at Dragon Age 2, we can very quickly see that there's nothing really but albedo here. Metal doesn't shine like metal. Dimensionality is faked entirely with baked-in shading. Then we make the jump to Inquisition and wow, you can see light actually reflecting off of materials now. Fabrics have their own unique qualities in how they're woven or have a pile like velvet. I don't know the specifics of how and when this capability developed, but somewhere between 2011 and 2014 we got it locked in enough to be of use. This says to me that it was still fairly new at the time and perhaps it wasn't an exact science in how the Frostbite engine handled it. Or maybe I'm completely wrong and someone just really wanted everyone and everything to show off this light bouncing tech to a maximum capacity. When it comes to Veilguard, I think it might also be down to something technical, though I'm not completely certain. What is known is that Veilguard was optimized to be able to run on decade-old hardware for the sake of people who aren't like me and don't want to buy a 40 series Nvidia card. This is definitely a positive move for making the game immediately available to play for people of varying financial brackets, something not a lot of consideration is given to all of the time. It's a nice philosophy that I give respect to. What this means in practice, though, is that there have probably been sacrifices made in order to pull this off. A bit of wizardry behind the scenes to make the low-end experience with a 970 from 2014 still worth playing. I'm not an expert on hardware, but I'm still leaning towards the opinion that the smoothness is indeed a stylistic choice that was initially informed by technical requirements. Whether or not this smoothness is so very bad that it can't be stomached, well, to put it bluntly, I will just get over it. Taken in isolation, it feels like a larger problem than it truly is. And yes, I miss the Inquisition textures very, very much, but I will get over it. And you can too if you want to play the game. The shininess in Inquisition sort of fades into the back of my mind after enough time passes. Also, the Qunari, this is just a skill issue, guys. I was also a little worried about this, but people have stepped up to show that it's possible to make pretty good looking ones. I think it is also pretty important to point out how limited the Qunari character creation was in Inquisition. Like, this is just sad. I have not played a Qunari pretty much because the customization of them was so limited. The fact that we can change their hair now is just leaps and bounds past what we had before, and I'm very grateful for that. Critcism 5. It doesn't look like Dragon Age. I saved this for the finale because I think it's the best one to end on. After all of this other more surface level discussion, let's really get into it. What does Dragon Age look like? What is the visual signature of the entire series? What changes has the Veilguard made that have disrupted this? I think the best place to look is the World of Thedas books. These two volumes collate everything about the series up to Inquisition, and I think that the art in here absolutely encapsulates the everything of the series. It's so gorgeous, painterly, detailed, refined, absolutely dripping with lore implications. Major shout out to these guys for what they have done for Dragon Age up until this point. To get on a soapbox for a second, if you'll allow me, this really shows what human artists can do, filling their work up with intentionality to make a world that feels fleshed out and lived in. A lot of this intentionality comes through in the specific details of Thedas. Architecture and fashion have a lot of thought behind them, changing in visual language based on what culture in Thedas they're from. Some of these outfits we've seen versions of since Origins. This little O-ring doodad is the cornerstone of a lot of fits. The Grey Wardens with their white and blue is just so iconic. I can definitely see where the current clothing of our companions has evolved from this sharper to vinter look with the repetition of hemlines that come to a point. Tasha's armor resembles the dragon scale armor we can equip in Inquisition. Overall, I can see through lines in all the companion concept art with art that has previously existed in the series, assuring me that the people who worked on their designs definitely paid attention, even if there's some armor designs that well, let's just say the Jester pajamas aren't in my Rook's closet. And yes, specific details are all well and good, but it would be wrong of me not to talk about the art style on a higher level. In order to do so, it's best to talk about how the series has evolved artistically from the beginning. It's no secret if you look back that people around the time of the release of Origins thought that it didn't really stand out from the crowd of other fantasy games visually. I think it's probably shocking for anyone who played Inquisition first to go back and see how humble the beginnings were, since Inquisition is so sure of itself and its visual identity. The opening cinematic of Origins is where much of Dragon Age's visual identity as a series was born. It is a memorable 2D animated sequence with a simplified art style that seems midway between Greek black figure vases and medieval illuminated manuscripts. By Dragon Age 2, this style matured into the Art Deco tinged one that we still reference heavily to this day. I don't think this style is going anywhere, thankfully. We could see it intact in this more recent material. Indeed, I don't have many complaints about any of the 2D art we've seen for the Veilguard so far. Apart from perhaps that these tarot cards are maybe a little too polished and clip-arty compared to the Inquisition, but that feels like a nitpick. They still look good anyway. This is enough teasing around the problem though. I'm pretty certain I know what the precise issue is here when people say it doesn't look like Dragon Age. It's all the saturated color. In the promotion material, in the magic effects, in the menus, it's everywhere, and it definitely alters the mood by being present. Inquisition had saturated colors too, but I believe its usage was pretty sparing and used mostly to contrast. The Inquisitor's bright green anchor was a spot of powerful alien magic in a world that didn't know what to do with its invasion. Lyrium glows blue or red to signify its power and danger. Necromancy is very purple. But these are the exceptions in a world that prefers jewel tones and dirt. I feel mostly neutral on all this Veilguard purple, but oh boy, it is a lot of purple, and I'm not mad at anyone who doesn't like it. Layer this on top of every character class having glowing attack feedback now, and Minrathous being all lit up at night, It's like the gamer rainbow LED craze has come to Thetis. At the same time, there are plenty of areas that don't have some sort of glow happening all the time. But the instant we get into battle or open the menu, all I can say here is the overall visual feel of flipping through the pages of World of Thetis is definitely different. More muted, more loose, and less graphic designer-y. You can see it in the new tarot set. These are maybe a little too clean, a little less detailed. And I would very much like to know who had the idea for this purple and who had the final word on this purple and what the significance of this purple is. I can picture someone pushing it as strong branding, since Inquisition was delineated by its green, but we all understood implicitly that green equals the Fade, a vitally important location within the lore. This purple? It doesn't mean anything to me right now. Will it later? Blue lyrium dragon plus red lyrium dragon somehow equals purple? I am not sure. So, to wrap this portion up, does it still look like Dragon Age? I think a lot of the important elements are here. The environment art, the presence of strong 2D art, details within the architecture and clothing, that is all there. However, thanks to a tip in the balance of saturated hues, if something is pinging as off to you, it might be that. Oh, and to be clear, I don't think color palette changes the ability of a game to tell a dark or gritty story either. Night City is literally so neon, and I don't think anyone would argue that the story of Cyberpunk 2077 actually has sincerely dark moments. It gave contrast to its neon in more grungy, dim spaces. I think that the Veilguard does understand the necessity for that in the variety of its level design. So, in conclusion, I love Dragon Age and I love art. Being able to talk about this at length has been so much fun for me, and I hope that it has given you some appreciation for the detail work needed to craft a game at this scope, even though I feel like I just barely scratched the surface. And I could go on talking about this for, I don't know. If you have questions, I will definitely, very likely make a follow-up to this after the game has actually launched so I can reassess. I will answer questions alongside that. And if you still don't like how Veilguard looks, I hope it has at least instilled a bit more respect for the earlier games in the series and what they achieved. And if you're one of the people who is all geared up to review bomb Veilguard when it comes out, hey, congrats for making it this far. Maybe consider not doing that. But even if you do, I just want you to know that it's not going to stop many of us from racking up hundreds if not thousands of hours in this game when it comes out. We are a very passionate community, and the time that I have spent with Dragon Age fans in real life at conventions, in artist alleys, doing cosplay stuff, those real life communities are really special. And maybe you should find something that inspires that much passion in you and do that instead of being edgy on the internet. At the end of the day, we get to play more Dragon Age, which is something I didn't even think we'd get to do, so I'm pleased as hell. Also, I'm not currently a shill, but if you would like to help me become one, please leave a rude comment. It helps with the algorithm. If I've learned anything at all while writing this, it's that it's okay to have a mixed opinion. I don't have to be purely negative or positive, and neither do you, but I feel a lot of people are compelled to take a stance thanks to the state of social media culture war fandom or discourse TM. I think the most valuable conversations are one where we concede some ground to just listen and adjust our position to be more nuanced than before. I am so appreciative of you taking the time to listen to me chat, and I hope wherever you are in time and space, art is making your life better. I'll see you soon.